the last time I saw my son, he was telling me to leave his wedding. I remember standing there, completely still, as if my body had turned to stone. The music was still playing, glasses were clinking, and laughter filled the room. And yet, in that moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears like a warning bell. I had just been told by my only child that I didn't belong. What made it worse? I was the one who paid for the whole thing. My name is Helen Whitmore. I'm 76 years old. I live alone in a quiet little town in Vermont. For most of my life, I was someone's wife. Then I was someone's mother. And now I'm just someone, still breathing, still here, trying to understand how a life built on love could leave me so invisible. I was married for 40 years to a kind, quiet man named Bill. We had one son, Jason. After Bill passed away, Jason became my everything. I poured all of my energy, all of my time, and all of my savings into making sure he had the kind of life we never did growing up. I believed in him, I trusted him, and I never not once expected that I'd become a guest in his life instead of a mother. I didn't think I'd ever share this story, but if you've ever given your whole heart to someone and felt it shatter in return, maybe you'll understand. Maybe you'll see a piece of yourself here. This isn't just about a wedding. It's about love, expectations, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to choose peace over pain. This is the story of how I paid for my own humiliation and what I learned after walking away from it. Jason was a bright boy growing up, curious, sensitive. He wasn't loud or rambunctious like other boys his age. Instead, he'd sit quietly with his books or follow me around the kitchen, asking 1,000 questions about why the sky was blue or how yeast made bread rise. I used to think he was special, not just smart kind too. When his father passed away, Jason had just turned 22. He was finishing college, struggling to find his place in the world. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with him that night after the funeral. He didn't cry. He just kept folding and unfolding a napkin in his lap. And when he finally spoke, he said, "What happens to us now?" I reached across the table, held his hand, and told him the truth. We keep going. That's all we can do. I sold my wedding ring a year later to help him cover rent after he lost his first job. I dipped into Bill's old retirement fund to help him move to New York and chase a career in design. Every dollar I gave him felt like love made visible. Not once did I think of it as a burden. That's what mothers do. We give. The years went by and Jason changed. He got busier. Calls became texts. Texts became silence. I chalked it up to adulthood work, stress life. I didn't want to guilt him, but every holiday felt a little quieter. Every birthday card felt more generic. The son who once hugged me just because I looked tired now barely returned my calls. Still, I believed in him. I told myself he was just overwhelmed, just trying to make something of himself. That one day he'd look back and realize everything I'd done was out of love. So when he called one spring afternoon and said, "Mom, I'm getting married," I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I thought finally, a reason for us to reconnect, to be close again, maybe even start over. And when he asked, almost awkwardly, if I could help pay for the wedding just to get the venue secured, "Mom, nothing crazy?" I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Of course I did. I thought this would be my moment too. A day to celebrate not just his future, but all the years I'd quietly carried him there. I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side of that yes. The first check I wrote was for the venue deposit, $10,000. Jason promised he'd pay me back once things settled down. I didn't press him. It wasn't about the money. It was about being part of his life again. Then came the florist, then the custom invitations, then the catering tastings. Each time, Jason would call, sounding just a little stressed, a little rushed, and I'd say, "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got it." Before I knew it, I had paid for over 85% of the entire wedding. I pulled from savings, my emergency fund, even a small inheritance I'd been quietly holding on to for years. It didn't feel like a sacrifice, at least not then. It felt like a chance to matter again. I imagined myself standing beside him on that day, proud and honored, maybe even giving a little speech. Something sweet, not too long, just enough to remind people I was his mother. But as the months passed, the tone began to shift. I never heard from his fiancée, Melanie, not once. No thank you note, no phone call. Jason explained it away. "She's busy with work," or "She's not good with phone calls, Mom." I tried not to take it personally. I wanted to like her. I wanted her to like me. Then I got the invitation. It arrived in the mail, addressed not as mother of the groomer Helen Whitmore, but simply Miss H. Whitmore. There was no mention of my role. No sign I'd be walking him down the aisle or even seated at the front. Just a generic line near the bottom that read, "We're so grateful to all who helped make this possible." It stung. Still, I told myself not to overthink. Maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe the planner had rushed. Maybe Melanie didn't know better. I even bought a new dress powder blue with lace sleeves, and had my hair done professionally for the first time in over a decade. I wanted to look like I belonged. But in my heart, a quiet ache had started to settle. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of ache you feel when someone starts shutting the door on you 1 inch at a time, and you keep telling yourself they'll open it back up soon. I kept hoping. That was my mistake. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early. I wanted to help. That's who I've always been, quietly useful. I had baked 24 lemon shortbread cookies, Jason's favorite growing up, and wrapped them neatly in gold foil. When I got to the venue, the staff didn't know who I was. One woman asked if I was catering. Another handed me a clipboard, assuming I was with the rentals team. I smiled politely and said, "I'm the groom's mother." She blinked, embarrassed. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me check where you're supposed to be." Where I was supposed to be turned out to be a small round table near the back, tucked behind a pillar. Not with family, not even with old friends or guests I recognized. Alone. And when I asked about the seating chart, a young planner with a headset told me, "You were moved last minute. The front rows are reserved for immediate family." I laughed, just a little, thinking it was a joke. Immediate family? I was his mother. But then the music started, and Jason walked down the aisle, not with me, not even giving me a glance, but with Melanie's uncle. He stood there at the altar, tall and smiling, while I sat behind a pillar next to strangers. And still, I said nothing. The vows were beautiful. I'll admit that. I watched his face soften as he looked at her. I saw a version of him I hadn't seen in years, gentle, open, full of promise. And it broke me a little, knowing that version of him no longer existed with me. After the ceremony, I approached him quietly while they were doing photos. "Jason," I said gently, "can I get one picture with you? Just one?" He looked at me like I was interrupting something important. "Now's not a great time, Mom. Can we do it later?" I nodded. I stood there with the cookies in my bag, the hem of my new dress brushing against the gravel, watching as he laughed with her parents, posed with her cousins, kissed her hand like something out of a magazine. Then came the reception. I wasn't listed in the program. There was no mother-son dance, no mention of me in the speeches. And when I finally approached him again this time, just to say how happy I was for him, he sighed. "Mom, can we not make a scene tonight?" That was it. No anger, no yelling, just a quiet, exhausted okay. I left before the cake was cut. No one stopped me. No one noticed. And as I walked to the parking lot under a string of twinkling lights, I realized I had paid for the music, the chairs, the linens, the wine, and still wasn't considered family. That was the night I knew something inside me had changed forever. The next morning, my phone was quiet. No thank you message, no photo from the night before, not even a check-in to see if I got home safely. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Jason and I used to do puzzles and homework, and stared at my phone like it owed me something. A sign, a reason, a trace of acknowledgement. None came. I thought about calling him, about asking gently, did I do something wrong? But the question itself felt like a surrender, like handing over my dignity for scraps of attention, so I didn't. Instead, I went for a walk, down to the lake where I used to push him on the swings, where we'd feed ducks and skip stones. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. It reminded me of being a mother when that word still felt full. Sacred, mine. That week, I tried to convince myself it was all just a misunderstanding, that they were overwhelmed, that a card or flowers might still come. They didn't. A month passed, then 2. Jason called once to ask if I could resend the receipt for the rehearsal dinner. "Melanie's filing taxes and needs it for deductions," he said. I sent it, along with the invoice breakdown of everything else I'd paid for, not out of spite, just clarity. I wanted, for once, for someone to see what I had done. He never replied. I didn't hear from him on my birthday, or on Mother's Day. The silence wasn't sharp. It was dull, like a door that had rusted shut from years of being left ajar, waiting to be used. And slowly I began to realize I had spent years feeding a version of love that no longer saw me. Not because I was bitter, but because I finally understood that love, in its truest form, isn't measured by how much you give, it's measured by how much you're seen while giving. I had given quietly, generously, with no scoreboard, no strings attached. But at some point, generosity without recognition becomes a void, a hole you pour yourself into, hoping someone will notice the echo. I sat with that thought for a long time, let it sting, let it teach me. And then, gently, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of all the things I loved but had let go of. Watercolor painting. Playing piano in the early evening. Baking for joy, not obligation. Gardening. Not for anyone else, just for me. Because if motherhood had taught me anything, it was how to care for something deeply. I just had to remember how to offer that care back to myself. So I did. And for the first time in a very long while, I began to feel full, not because someone filled me up, but because I stopped emptying myself for those who no longer saw the cost. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after the wedding, I received a group email from Melanie. So it was a mass update: holiday plans, photo links, a few sentences about their new apartment. I was included, but only as part of the list. There was no greeting, no direct mention. Just a line at the bottom: thanks again to everyone who helped make our big day so special. That was the last thread. I stared at that sentence, rereading it like it might change if I blinked long enough. But it didn't. And somewhere deep inside me, a soft, steady voice whispered, "You are not invisible. They just stopped looking." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the stack of receipts, the ones I had saved not to keep score, but to keep myself from forgetting the truth. $10,000, venue deposit. $4,200, rehearsal dinner. $3,700, custom florals. $5,800, photographer. $2,100, Melanie's dress, when her mother's card declined. $6,300, miscellaneous, catering upgrades, transportation, hotel blocks. Over $32,000, years of quiet savings. And not once, not a single time did anyone say, "Helen, we couldn't have done this without you." I didn't need a parade. I didn't even need a spotlight, but I had earned a place in that room. And instead, I had been placed behind a pillar, handed a thank you meant for the masses, and reduced to a line item on a tax form. That night, I lit a candle and sat in silence. Not out of sadness, but ceremony. A small act to mark the end of something that had gone on too long. I deleted the photos I had saved, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I took the blue dress to the donation center. I printed out a new photo for my hallway frame, not of the wedding, but of me, smiling at the lake, paint on my hands and a flower in my hair. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I set a boundary. Not with anger, not with drama. Just a soft message. "Hi Jason, I hope you're both doing well. I've been reflecting a lot. I think I need some space for a while. Please respect that. I wish you peace." He never replied, and I didn't expect him to. But I also didn't feel small for saying it. Because sometimes revenge doesn't look like slamming a door. Sometimes it looks like gently closing it and walking away with your shoulders back. I didn't need to prove my worth anymore. I had already done that in the silence, in the receipts, in every unacknowledged act of love. Now I was choosing peace. And that, in the end, was more powerful than any apology never sent. A year has passed since the wedding. People ask if Jason and I are close, and I answer honestly, not anymore. I don't say it with bitterness, just truth, like naming the weather outside. Some relationships don't break, they fade, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've been standing alone for a long time. But here's what I didn't expect: in the silence they left behind, something beautiful started to grow. I joined a watercolor class at the library. The teacher, Marlene, is 74 and makes the best cinnamon tea. She says I paint with emotion, that my skies look like they've been through something. Maybe they have. I started baking again, not trays of cookies for people who forget me, but small batches of lemon tarts I eat on the porch while reading old novels. I repotted the dying lavender plant in my garden. It bloomed again this spring. And I made new friends not out of obligation, but connection. Women who laugh with their eyes, who bring wine and honesty, who sit with me on Sundays as we share stories about grown children and the ache of a needed, then forgotten. I don't hate Jason. That's not the point of this story. This isn't a revenge story built on destruction. It's about dignity. About realizing that sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do is stop begging to be seen and walk away without apology. I had been the backbone of that boy's life, his steady, his safe, and while I'll always carry the love that made me his mother, I will no longer carry the weight of pretending I was treated like one. There's a quiet power in no longer chasing closure. In not showing up to remind people you exist. In choosing peace over performance. Sometimes we stay too long at tables where our presence is convenient but our absence goes unnoticed. But not anymore. Now I write my own invitations. I plan my own holidays. I dance barefoot in my kitchen to records from the 70s. I say no to things that shrink me. I say yes to things that feel like sunlight. And every once in a while, when I walk past the photo of me at the lake, I remember I am still here. Not because someone chose me, but because I finally chose myself. If you've ever felt forgotten, replaced, or quietly erased, I want you to hear this: your story doesn't end at their table. Sometimes, the real beginning starts the moment you leave. So take your seat somewhere new. And make it beautiful. Because you were never invisible. They just stopped looking. And now, you've stopped waiting.